This is Obscure Files, the archive of real-life horror, chilling encounters, and mysteries left unsolved. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and prepare to descend into the darkness. Emily breathed deeply as she stepped out of her rental car, gazing up at the quaint two-story farmhouse she'd booked for the weekend. It was late autumn in rural Pennsylvania, and golden afternoon light cast long shadows across the yard. There were no other houses in sight, just fields and trees, which made the property feel very isolated. The old house looked welcoming enough. Weathered white paint, a wraparound porch with a swing, and tall oak trees swaying gently. It promised peace and quiet, exactly what she needed on this solo getaway from the bustle of Philadelphia. Yet, as she retrieved her suitcase and approached the front door, a slight unease tugged at the back of her mind. The Airbnb listing had mentioned that one of the rooms would remain locked during her stay. Emily assumed it was just a storage space for the host's belongings and hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, standing in the foyer, she couldn't help but glance at the door at the end of the hallway. It was an old wooden door with peeling paint, distinct from the freshly painted walls around it. A shiny brass knob contrasted with the door's aged appearance. That must be the locked room, she thought, feeling a tiny prick of curiosity. She shook off the thought and carried her suitcase upstairs to the master bedroom she'd be using. The house's interior was charming in a rustic way. Creaking hardwood floors, antique furniture, and the faint scent of lavender cleaner. After unpacking a few items and fixing a light dinner for herself, Emily settled on the living room couch with a book. The country silence was profound, no traffic, just crickets and the occasional creak of the old house. By 11 p.m., she was nodding off. She headed upstairs, yawning, and made sure to firmly shut her bedroom door before crawling into bed. That first night, Emily was startled awake at 3 a.m. by a faint thump. She lay frozen in bed, ears straining. It sounded like something had fallen over, or a light knock somewhere in the house. She gathered the courage to slip out of bed and open her bedroom door a crack. The hallway was empty and dark, and the door to the locked room remained closed. Nothing stirred in the gloom. Emily quickly shut her door again, heart pounding. The silence returned, and after a few tense minutes, she convinced herself it was just the old house settling or a gust of wind. Eventually, she drifted back into an uneasy sleep. Morning sunlight brought a sense of relief and normalcy. Over a cup of coffee in the kitchen, Emily chided herself for being spooked so easily. Being alone in an unfamiliar house can play tricks on you, she reasoned. To shake off the nerves, she spent the day out, driving into the nearest town for lunch and taking a short hike in a local park. It was late afternoon when she returned to the farmhouse, pleasantly tired from the outing. As soon as Emily stepped inside, she noticed something odd. On the hallway floor, near the base of the stairs, was a small muddy footprint. She paused, brow furrowing. It looked like a footprint the size of a child's bare foot, and a trail of faint mud smudges led part-way toward the locked room door before disappearing. Emily's stomach lurched. She hadn't tracked in any mud, and it hadn't been there that morning. The house was supposed to be empty. Uneasy, Emily quickly checked all the doors and windows. Everything was still locked. Feeling a growing sense of dread, she called the host, a man named David. He sounded genuinely surprised and concerned, insisting that no one should have been there and that he certainly hadn't stopped by. When she mentioned the child-sized footprint, he fell silent for a moment, then stammered that he had no idea what could explain it. He offered to come by the next day to check the house, but Emily politely declined. It was already evening, and a storm was brewing outside. She decided to stay one more night and leave first thing in the morning. By nightfall, a thunderstorm had rolled in. Rain lashed the windows and wind howled through the surrounding trees. Emily tried to relax by watching a movie on her laptop in bed, but her nerves were on edge. Every creak of the house made her jump. Around 10 p.m., during a lull in the storm, she thought she heard a soft scuffling noise from the hallway. She paused the movie, heart thudding in her ears. The power flickered twice, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. The air beyond felt cold. Using her phone light, Emily peered inside. It was a small bedroom, and what she saw made her skin crawl. The beam danced over a child's bed frame with a dusty quilt, pale yellow wallpaper peeling off the walls, and a few old toys scattered on the floor. A teddy bear, a wooden rocking horse, and a red rubber ball. The scene looked as if no one had stepped foot in the room for years. Thunder boomed overhead. In that jarring moment, Emily noticed the red ball begin to roll across the floor on its own, bumping gently into the wall. She let out a squeak of surprise, the light shaking in her hand. There was no draft, no logical reason for it to move. She took a step back, her mind racing to find an explanation, and coming up empty. Suddenly, the door was yanked out of her hand and slammed shut with explosive force, right in her face. Emily screamed, stumbling backward. In the pitch-black hallway, she fumbled desperately for the knob. It wouldn't turn. The door felt as though someone on the other side was holding it shut. From inside the locked room came a new sound, a faint sobbing, the heartbreaking cry of a young girl. "Please," a tiny voice whimpered from within. Emily's blood ran cold, adrenaline surging. She abandoned the door and ran for the stairs. Behind her, she heard the door to the locked room creak open again, but she refused to look back. Lightning lit the hallway as she flew down the steps. She snatched her car keys from the side table by the front door and yanked the door open, not even pausing to put on shoes or grab her coat. Rain battered her as she dashed to her car. With trembling hands, she fumbled the keys and practically threw herself into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered on the first try, making her panic, but on the third turn of the key, it roared to life. She slammed the doors locked and hit the gas, gravel spraying from under her tires as she tore out of the driveway. Only once the house was a shrinking silhouette in her rearview mirror did Emily begin to catch her breath. Her heart was hammering and her hands were shaking uncontrollably on the steering wheel. She kept driving through the downpour, not caring about the belongings she left behind in the house. She could retrieve them later, or maybe never. At the end of the long country road, she finally reached the intersection with the main highway. Emily slowed down for just a moment, an automatic response to check for traffic, and an instinct made her glance in the rearview mirror. Far behind, through the sheets of rain, the old farmhouse stood, with one window on the second floor, now faintly aglow. It was the window of that locked room. Emily's breath caught in her throat. In that window, she saw the small figure of a girl. The child stood at the glass, watching her leave. A flash of lightning revealed the little face, pale, eyes hollow and sorrowful, and fixed on Emily. With a cry, Emily stomped on the accelerator and sped off onto the highway, her car fishtailing before it found traction on the wet pavement. She didn't slow down until she reached the lights of a town many miles away. That night, she checked into a motel and stayed awake under the harsh glow of the room's lamp until dawn, too shaken to sleep. In the days that followed, Emily researched the history of that farmhouse and discovered the truth behind the locked room. 40 years ago, a little girl named Sarah had died in that house under tragic circumstances. The child had been locked in that bedroom by her disturbed mother, who then took her own life. By the time anyone found Sarah, it was too late. Her spirit never left that room. The host, David, was the woman's son, Sarah's older half-brother. He had inherited the property, but could never bring himself to clear out or enter that room, leaving it exactly as it was decades ago. When Emily contacted him, David broke down and apologized profusely. He admitted he'd long suspected something was wrong in the house. He had felt cold spots and heard faint noises near that room ever since he was young, but he had never seen what Emily saw. He never imagined a guest would be endangered. He thought that keeping the door shut and warning people away would be enough to contain whatever lingered there. Emily has never returned to that farmhouse. She vowed never again to stay in an isolated Airbnb, no matter how charming the photos. The listing had promised peace and quiet, but what she found in that house was a horror beyond her worst nightmares, one that will haunt her for the rest of her life. Maya and Danielle pulled up to the quaint suburban house in a quiet corner of Vermont just as dusk was falling. They were on a New England road trip and had booked a 2-night stay at this Airbnb to break up a long drive. The house was an old colonial-style home on a quiet street. Their host, a middle-aged man named Richard, greeted them on the front porch with a polite smile. He was in his late 50s, with thinning grey hair and wire-frame glasses. "Welcome, come on in," Richard said warmly as he ushered them inside. Inside the house was dim, smelling of dust and old wood. An antique chandelier in the foyer sputtered to life as Ashley, who everyone called by her nickname Ash, flipped the light switch. They caught glimpses of an old parlor and dining room off the main hall as they headed toward the kitchen. Maya felt an immediate, inexplicable tension in the air, but she brushed it off as fatigue from driving. Danielle, ever the friendly one, struck up conversation with Richard about the house. He mentioned he'd been living alone there for 5 years and recently started renting out a spare room to travelers. As he led them down a short hallway to the guest room, Richard pointed out the bathroom and mentioned that his own bedroom was upstairs, so they'd have plenty of privacy. Maya noticed one door at the end of the hall that Richard did not open. It had a padlock on it. "Oh, just storage," he said lightly when he caught her glancing at it. The evening passed uneventfully at first. The two friends went out to grab dinner in town and returned around 9 p.m. Richard was in the living room reading when they came in, and he chatted with them amiably for a few minutes about their trip. He seemed perfectly nice, but there was something about his eyes that made Maya uneasy, a kind of intense, lingering gaze whenever he looked at them. Danielle didn't seem to notice, laughing and sharing stories freely. Richard eventually excused himself, saying he was turning in for the night and reminding them to lock the front door. Their guest room was comfortable enough, 2 twin beds with thick quilts and floral wallpaper that probably hadn't been changed since the 1980s. As the house grew quiet, the friends whispered across the dark between their beds. Maya quietly mentioned the padlocked door, but Danielle just mumbled that she was overthinking it and drifted off. Sometime deep in the night, Maya awoke with a start. She wasn't sure why at first. The room was pitch black and silent. She checked her phone. 2:27 a.m. As she lay back, she heard it, the faint creak of floorboards from somewhere outside their room. It sounded like slow, careful footsteps in the hall, and Maya's heart began to race. The footsteps approached their door and then stopped. She held her breath in the silence until the doorknob rattled gently. Maya's blood went cold. Someone was trying the door, testing if it was locked. Thankfully, she had turned the lock before bed. In the other bed, Danielle stirred at the noise, mumbling in her sleep. Maya sat up, unable to tear her eyes from the faintly jiggling knob. It wobbled once more, a bit more forcefully this time, then went still. She then heard floorboards creak softly as whoever it was moved away. Maya's heart thumped in her chest. She stayed awake, rigid, for what felt like hours until exhaustion finally overtook her just before dawn. In the morning, sunlight streaming through the curtains made the previous night feel unreal. Maya wasn't even sure if it had truly happened or if she'd imagined it in a half-sleep state. Over a quick breakfast of coffee and muffins that Richard provided, she studied their host surreptitiously. He looked a bit tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but greeted them politely as usual. Was it Richard outside their door last night? And if so, why had he been creeping around at 2:30 in the morning? Maya decided not to confront him, not without proof. Danielle was groggy and oblivious, making only an offhand comment that the mattress was a little stiff. Maya caught her friend's eye and subtly mentioned hearing noises, but Danielle shrugged it off as the old house settling. Maya and Danielle weren't leaving until the next morning, giving them a full day to relax. With a heavy rainstorm outside, they spent the day indoors. Danielle did some reading in the guest room, while Maya found herself restless. Her thoughts kept drifting to the padlocked door and the midnight visitor. When Richard stepped out mid-afternoon, saying he was running to the grocery store, Maya's curiosity got the better of her. She decided to take a quick look around. She wandered the house for a few minutes and eventually stood before the locked door at the end of the hall. She gently tried the handle even though the padlock secured it. It was solidly locked. Kneeling down, she peered through the old keyhole out of sheer impulse, but saw nothing but darkness. As she stood, her eyes caught something on the doorframe. Faint scratch marks, short and erratic, near the jamb, as if someone had clawed at the door in a panic. Maya's heart lurched. Before she could inspect further, Danielle's voice came from behind, startling her. "What are you doing?" Danielle asked nervously. Clearly, Maya's anxiety had rubbed off on her a bit. Maya showed her the scratch marks. Danielle frowned, looking unnerved now. The two decided to take a quick peek into Richard's upstairs office or bedroom while he was away, thinking perhaps they could find a clue or a key while they had the chance. Upstairs, the door to his study was slightly ajar. They stepped in cautiously. The room was sparsely furnished, almost impersonal, but a few framed photographs stood on a shelf. One was of Richard with a woman and a young boy, all smiling at a beach. It looked old. Richard had more hair and fewer lines on his face. He had never mentioned a family. On the desk, half hidden under some papers, Maya found a folded newspaper clipping. The yellowed headline read, "Local mother and child missing, feared dead. Husband sought for questioning." Maya's eyes widened. The man in the old newsprint photo was unmistakably Richard. Only the name was different. The article identified him as Robert Sullivan. According to the article, 20 years ago in Massachusetts, a woman and her 6-year-old son had vanished, and the husband, Robert Sullivan, was suspected of foul play before he disappeared without a trace. Maya's hands shook as she realized the implication. Their friendly host, Richard, was living under an assumed name. Before they could process the shock fully, they heard the front door downstairs close. Richard was back. Maya's stomach dropped. They had to get out of his room fast. Clutching the clipping, she and Danielle slipped into the hallway just as Richard's footsteps started up the stairs. He spotted them immediately. Richard stopped on the stair landing, one hand on the railing, the other hand hidden behind his back. His eyes darted from Maya to Danielle and then to the doorway of his study. "What are you doing in my room?" he asked quietly, an edge in his voice that sent a chill through Maya. We thought we blew a fuse in our room and the breaker might be up here," Maya stammered, attempting a weak smile. It was a terrible lie, and Richard's tightening expression showed he didn't believe a word. He resumed climbing the stairs slowly. As he reached the top, he revealed what he'd been holding behind his back: a hammer. Rainwater from outside glistened on his coat and dripped to the floor, indicating he had just come in. "You shouldn't have gone in there," Richard said softly, almost regretfully. "Nosy girls." Without further warning, he lunged forward with startling speed. Maya screamed and both she and Danielle bolted down the upstairs hallway. Richard was quick. He grabbed at Danielle's arm, causing her to yelp in pain. Maya whirled around and, without thinking, hurled the heavy book she still had in her hand, the phone book she'd moved earlier on the desk. It struck Richard in the chest, making him stumble and loosen his grip. Danielle wrenched free, and the two women sprinted for the stairs. They raced to the front door, but in their panic, they hadn't realized Richard had locked it behind him. Maya fumbled with the deadbolt, hands shaking violently. Richard's footsteps thundered behind them on the steps. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, voice low and filled with menace. At last, the key turned and the bolt clicked. Danielle flung the door open and they both barreled out onto the porch, nearly tripping over each other. They didn't dare glance back. The two ran barefoot through the mud and rain toward their car. Richard emerged in the doorway, but he didn't chase them. He simply stood on the porch, the hammer dangling in his hand, watching with a strange, almost sorrowful expression as they scrambled into the vehicle. Maya's fingers were ice cold and slick with rain as she jammed the key into the ignition. The engine caught, and she slammed the car into reverse, the headlights sweeping across Richard's figure. For one tense moment, Maya's eyes met Richard's through the windshield. There was an unsettling calm on his face. Then he turned and walked back into the house, closing the door behind him. The tires spun on the wet gravel before finding purchase. Maya sped away from the house as fast as she dared. Only once they were several miles down the road did either of them breathe. They drove straight to the nearest police station. Within the hour, officers were dispatched to Richard's address, but the property was dark and silent. Richard, or rather Robert Sullivan, had vanished into the stormy night. When police searched the house, they found disturbing evidence in the padlocked storage room. Old skeletal remains hidden beneath loose floorboards, later identified as Richard Dolquin Roberts' missing wife and child. The truth of his hidden past was more horrifying than Maya and Danielle could have imagined. Traumatized but alive, they had helped solve a decades-old crime. But Richard was never found. To this day, the memory of his slow footsteps outside their door and that final stare from the porch haunts Maya. A reminder of how close they came to becoming part of his hidden past. Which story got under your skin the most? Tell us in the comments. And if you think you're ready for more, subscribe to Obscure Files. You never know what the next file might reveal.